The Bible is often seen as a historical book that people only turn to whenever they want to either learn a spiritual lesson or they want to learn about how to govern their personal life. But most people never actually go to the Bible when they're looking to grow or scale a business. And it always leaves me in shock because I spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs and business owners in the nature of work that I do. And I just noticed so many correlations between the biggest businesses and how they operate. And by biggest, I mean the Fortune 500 companies, the companies that you see on Wall Street, how they operate their businesses and how they're so closely aligned and there's so many parallels to the way that these three laws govern the business realm and how you can actually use this to build not just a healthy business but build a business that you actually enjoy going to because it's one that you're building based off of biblical truths. Now, these foundations that once you actually have them implemented, they're going to allow you to attract more customers and deals effortlessly. You're going to be able to build without burning out because burnout comes from misalignment and you're able to grow regardless of economic conditions, kind of like what you saw with Joseph, where there was the seven cows, the seven fat cows, and the seven skinny cows in that story. And God actually gave the dream to the person who was in charge. And Joseph was able to come in, interpret the dream, and then put systems in a place that allowed them to go through those years where there was an economic downturn. So let's go ahead and move right into the first law, and that is the following. We have the law of sowing. Nothing can be harvested until we actually sow a seed. And so how do we sow? Because we often hear this throughout scripture, especially when you study the Bible, it's usually interpreted from like an agricultural sense. And while that is true, because there were periods where the people that were the examples that were being used from the people that were in that land, they were farmers. And so you often saw Jesus speak from a sower's perspective. The way that we sow and how we sow has everything to do with the posture of our heart for what we're building. Here's what I mean by that. So we're going to sow through our actions, meaning you're not going to compound intention. Good intentions don't compound. Habits do, meaning we sow through our actions. So there is a belief architecture or a belief system that we must first form when we are sowing, because if you've ever heard the formula, the be do have, you are going to do something based on how you see yourself or how you think you've been created by God. And so if you struggle to do something, that means that you don't have a positive association with that thing that you're actually doing, which is why so many people struggle with things like sowing into their businesses, tithing, generosity. And so, in fact, like that's not even a biblical mandate. That's just a like the law of generosity is you give more, you're going to have more. It's not the other way around. If I had more, I would give more. And so what do? We sow through our actions. We sow through our generosity. This could be the time that we invest into our product development, the time or energy or effort that we invest into cultivating culture for our customers, for our clients, and also for the people that we bring on, because you start to move away from, or not necessarily move away, but you start to evolve from you just acquiring skills. So depending on the level of entrepreneur that you are, you're going to have certain skill sets that you're going to acquire. That is a form of sowing. But the next level or the next rung on that is you're going to start developing talent, which means that you're actually going to find a place in your business where you can start removing yourself from. That could come in the form of systems. Again, you're sowing time, energy, resources into that. Or it's going to come through the people that you're starting to pour into that are taking over the role that you had, whether it's an entry-level role or if maybe you are in the marketing scene. I know that we deal a lot with consultants. We deal a lot with marketing agencies. And so some of these guys and some of these gals, they are removing themselves from the day-to-day operations. And so they obviously have to take time, energy, and sowing and training someone else so that they can ultimately remove themselves. So a passage that we can tie into this and see is it comes from Galatians 6:7, and it is, do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. So it is impossible for us to expect for anything to grow if we haven't actually spent time cultivating that field that we've been designated to. So, i.e., people that are called to be shepherded by you, or people who are called that you're called to serve. We'll tie that in here in just a minute, and how you actually sow into those relationships, into the products that you're developing, because consistency is going to be an important metric to follow, because you sow through consistency. You don't plant a seed and then harvest the next morning. Biblical business is built through faithful, consistent effort, even when the results aren't visible yet, which is really difficult, especially if God is trying to walk you through a season of instant gratification and He's working that thing out of you. Believe me, the law of sowing is going to be just that. Second law that we have in place is going to be built around serving people. A biblical business is not built around extracting money from people. I want to be very clear with this. A biblical business is not built around just extracting money from people. It's built around solving problems and creating value into a marketplace. And the marketplace rewards those who serve well consistently. And so we serve first and then the profit follows, which means that when we actually put out good work into the marketplace, we start to build this fancy word called brand. Brand is just a reputation off of a collection of words that you kept to yourself and to the marketplace. And so an example of this is if I am creating a product and I tell someone that the product is $9 and they go and they buy that digital product or the physical product or whatever it is. And on the page, I say, if you take this product, your headache is going to go away. If they take the product and the headache goes away, what happens? The brand, AKA you, your personal brand or your company brand, if it's for that product, it starts to build a reputation because it says, okay, they can actually deliver on what they say. But conversely, what happens? If we put out a product or we put out a promo and the advertisement doesn't actually align to what we're actually selling, AKA they buy it, it doesn't deliver, wasn't exactly what they wanted, and we don't actually attempt to either make our product or service better or at least make the situation with the person who bought it better, then what happens in the marketplace? We actually catch a stray, which is a negative remark on our reputation. And so now whenever you put out a product or you put out a service into the marketplace and you didn't actually keep your promise the first time, people remember that. And the market never lies. It always has a way to reinforce what they've already received or lack thereof. And so if we put out something into a marketplace and someone is satisfied with it, it didn't deliver on it, it's going to be harder. We actually have to work 3, if not 5 times harder the second time around or the third time around to help the brand kind of go back to what's called baseline. And so what happens here? Service builds influence. And so the business owners with the most influence aren't always the loudest marketers. They're not always the loudest marketers. And so they're the ones who have the deepest track record of serving others well. I've met people that I've consulted, that I've coached inside one of my businesses where you couldn't find these people online. You couldn't find like a website. You couldn't find the landing page. You couldn't there was no Instagram handle. There was no Facebook, nothing. But somehow they were running legitimate operations. So when I started talking to these people, I say, okay, how are you running these operations? Like you're nowhere to be found. And they just, when they start speaking, you can just tell that this person has a network that runs deep below the surface. And it runs deep below the surface because they've actually postured themselves, whether they know this or not. Some of these people aren't even believers, by the way, but they're running off of these principles that are laws, regardless of whether you believe it or not. As long as you have the function of it, it's going to work. This is why, like, side note, sometimes you'll see someone that builds wealth and you're like, but that person's evil. Yes, but they're running off of a certain system that always reproduces the result, regardless. And so if I'm a good person or a bad person, if I step outside and it's raining, I'm going to get wet. It's the same thing here. If you put the proper business mechanics in place, whether you're a good person or a bad person, your business is going to generate money. Now, what happens with the money, because money is a non-binary, meaning it's not good or evil, it just is. That's obviously what happens to the person. But anyways, I digress. So when these people build these businesses and they go in and they start serving people, we align it with the scripture, which it says in Matthew 23:11, and it says, the greatest among you shall be the servant. And so the people that you see leading the front, the people that you see with the biggest businesses, the people that you see with the most profitable companies, they've put in the groundwork in understanding the market better than anyone else. And this is whether you like the person or not, by the way. But they have taken time to develop a product, develop a service that people actually want to engage with, which means that people are going to exchange currency for that thing because it solves their problem, AKA at that point, or i.e. at that point, you can charge a premium. And then the third law that we want to tap into is the law of stewardship. So notice the sequence here of how we're moving along things, right? We have the first law, and I'll backtrack so we can see it again. We have the law of sowing, which is where you're working the ground that you've been given, where you're working the marketplace that you've been given. You have the leads, you have the influence, you have the platform, you have people coming to you, you have people opting in to find out about your thing. You then have the law of serving, which means you now start having customers, clients, people that start trusting you with their hard-earned dollars, or people that start trusting you with their financial future once you start bringing people onto your team, onto your company. And then the third is the law of stewardship. So this is where everything kind of like comes together. This is why all three of these laws work like what you would consider a flywheel. If you know anything about the way flywheels work, is that once you get it spinning, it's going to create enough energy in and of itself for that flywheel to continue to spin. And so I know that Jeff Bezos spends a lot of time talking about flywheels and how they have one metric or one division inside the business that influences the other part of the business. And once all these essentially these departments inside of the businesses start to communicate to each other, it starts to form a flywheel, which means that the business starts to have its own momentum. And that's where you can start stepping back as a business owner and watching things flow. So this is what we want to get to. And so the law of stewardship, you're not just managing. I'm sorry, you're managing, you're not just an owner. I'm sorry, you're a manager, you're not an owner. Everything entrusted to you. This is going to be your business, your finances, your team, your opportunities, your influence isn't ultimately yours. And this is the part that gets like difficult for most business owners, is because we feel that we built this thing, so we have to keep it propped up. But we miss the back half of this, which is stewardship means that managing it as it's all yours or all in your hands means that you think you're in control of it, but you're just accountable for it. The person who's actually in control is God. And so when we have these businesses that we're building, these finances, God, what do I do with these finances? Ultimately, you've given it to me. God, how do I shepherd these people? How do I walk with these people? How do I counsel these customers? How do I work with this business dynamic? Ultimately, you brought me these people for a reason. You've given me the characteristics, the identity, the skill sets to be able to handle this moment. And so this ends up releasing a lot of pressure as an entrepreneur, because you think that, man, like I have to do this dance in this pony show in order for me to keep the lights on. And that's not the way that it works when we're building inside of a godly ecosystem. So stewardship over your influence means that every platform, every audience, every opportunity to lead is a stewardship assignment. Use it to build others up, not just to build up your brand. Stewardship over your team. The people on your team are entrusted to your leadership. How you develop them, protect them, it's a big one. How you protect people is a big one. And invest in them is part of your stewardship and your responsibility. And so a piece of scripture that I want to tie into this for us is Luke 16:10, which is whoever is entrusted or whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. When we are building businesses and we're watching how we grow our ecosystems with our clients, with our team, with our platforms, when you're just watching how much money is in an account, it can be demoralizing because there's a gap between where you are now and where you see yourself. When you're watching and you put up a video and the metrics don't line up to what you see, you're like, man, that was a good piece of content, or that was a good ad. Why didn't it get the traction that I needed? It's because there's too much attachment to it. A lot of people talk about the law of attraction. I think that we need to practice a little bit more of being detached from the outcome. God is ultimately in charge, and he's in the business of us gaining the outcome. I am just in the stewardship business. I'm in the sowing business, which means that I can control how I show up every single day to my business, how I communicate with my team, how I speak to my client base, the type of content that I put out. Those are all things that you can control as the business owner. What you can't control is who actually converts. Now, you can obviously do your thing. There's a bunch of marketers on there that they think that if I say this one magical thing, then all these people are going to convert and they're going to make it rain. No, it's not how it works. Especially when God's hand is on your business, there's going to be instances where you're actually going to do things more often than not, by the way. Things that are either counterculture or counterintuitive to how most people would actually think that you should be building. And it actually feels like it's going against the grain, but it's not. It's actually kingdom aligned, which is the whole purpose of this video and what we've been discussing. So if you found value in this piece of content, consider hitting the subscribe button, sharing it with someone else that you think is also going to find value in it as well as they continue to build their operations. And if you found value in this video, then you'll enjoy this one as well right here.